Hello, I'm Adam Southern, and this is Page by Page, a show dedicated to promoting literacy, authors, their works, and their words. And today my guest is David Bell, author of The Forgotten Girl, published by New American Library. Book's brand new, came out just October 7th, right?
Just 1 week ago.
Just one week ago. Honored to have you with me today.
Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. All
right, let's start out a little bit about you, David. Tell us a little bit about who is David Bell.
Well, that's a huge question to start with, isn't it? Basically, I'm an English professor at Western Kentucky University. I'm starting my 7th year at WKU this year, and I'm a writer, and I write suspense novels. So I kind of have these two halves to my personality, I guess, or these two sides to what I do professionally. I teach students writing during the day, and then in the rest of my time, I write thrillers and try to entertain people that way.
Very good. Let's go ahead and ask you this. I like to ask all the guests this. What advice do you have to anyone that would like to become a writer?
Well, I think there's a lot of advice that people get given about being a writer. The first is read a lot, I think. I think you have to read a lot. And I would tell people, don't just read in the genre that you want to write in. I would say read everything. I mean, read history, read romance novels, read everything that you can get your hands on, because I think only by reading a lot do writers subconsciously absorb story structure and the way to tell stories. So I think reading a lot is the first thing, and then, not surprisingly, write a lot is the second thing. I think people who become successful as writers are people who write on a regular basis. I think having some kind of a schedule and routine for writing is an important thing, even if it's just 1 hour a day or 1 page a day. But I think when you get into a routine where if you're not writing, it feels unusual, then I think you're on the way to becoming a writer. I liken it to exercise. You know, if you exercise a lot, the days you don't exercise, you feel like, hey, something's missing. I think writing is the same way. It's something that you exercise, it's a muscle, it's something that your brain develops. So do it on a regular basis until it just becomes part of your life.
Very good. Free advice from a college professor here. So.
Oh, it's not free. You can send me the check.
I read in your biography where your wife is also a writer. That's
yes.
How is that with two writers in the house?
Well, you'd think that one of us would have been smart enough to marry a doctor or a computer programmer or somebody like that. What it means, you know, the downside is that we're both in a field that has a lot of insecurity and has a lot of uncertainty about it. So that's the downside. But the upside is that we understand each other. We're both doing the same thing. We understand what the other person is going through. We have a built-in editor in the house who can read our work and give advice and those sorts of things. So in the long run, it is by far mostly positive. The negatives are just that little bit of insecurity that you have because no one really knows how their writing career is going to go in the future.
Right. Right. Before we get started with The Forgotten Girl, I want to talk about one of the characters of the book, Nora. She's a public librarian in the book, and read your biography, and I believe it was the Westwood Public Library, very important in your life as a child. How important are public libraries to you?
Well, you know, I was lucky that you were talking about advice for writers. I was lucky that when I was a kid, I grew up in a house with parents who read all the time and always had books around. And that's why, to me, reading was just a natural thing. And my parents, especially my dad, always took me to the public library. It was just a normal part of the routine. At least once a week, we'd go to the library. And in Cincinnati, where I grew up, we had a library in every neighborhood. And I think that having lived in a few different places, I know that not every community has great library resources. Where I live in Bowling Green, we have a great library system. They do a lot of outreach, they do a lot of programming and events, and clearly they devote a lot of resources to the library. So libraries are very important because it's a place where you can go, you can find out what's going on, it's a place where authors can go and read. You know, I've been on this book tour for the last week or so, and I think by far the majority of the stops I've made have been in libraries, and I always find that libraries do some of the best job of getting the word out to their community. They have a lot, they have a network of people they draw on. The people who come in are interested in books. So libraries are, I think, the heartbeat of any community.
Great, thank you. You've been a busy guy. I've been watching you online, Facebook, Twitter. You've been making a lot of stops on your tour.
Social media is very important these days.
It sure is. Forgotten Girl, great book. Really enjoyed it. It kept me guessing until the end.
Thank you.
The book has two plots that sort of merge together. One plot, of course, is 27 years ago or so, and then the one other plot is kind of in the present.
Right.
Can you tell us as much as you can about these two plots? I know we don't want to give it all away because this is, after all, suspense.
Right,
but,
of course.
Get us started with the book, if you will.
Well, the book starts with the main character, Jason, and he's a middle-aged guy, and he's moved back to his hometown from New York City. On his high school graduation night, his best friend, a guy named Logan, left town. And everybody thinks they know where Logan went and what Logan has been up to. But Jason has always wondered, why haven't I seen my friend again? What has he been up to? What happened? So that's one thing. And then Jason's sister, whose name is Hayden, shows up on his doorstep at the very beginning of the book. He hasn't seen her in several years because she's had a drinking problem and she's been estranged from the family. She shows up on his doorstep at the very beginning of the book and says, I'm back in town and I'm doing something important and I need a favor from you. The favor is that she drops off her teenage daughter and says, I'll be back in a couple of days to get my daughter. I'm not giving anything away when I say Hayden doesn't come back when she says she's going to come back. And if you read the book, you'll find out that maybe those two things have something to do with each other. Maybe Hayden is back in town because she knows something about Logan. And Jason is going to finally find out some secrets that a lot of other people know, but that he hasn't known for many, many years.
Oh, very good. J.T. Ellison called your book an unforgettable story full of surprises. And I asked J.T. this question when she was on the show. Where do you mystery writers come up with this stuff? Do you read a lot of the news, or where do you get these weird plots from?
What are you trying to say, that mystery writers are weird? Is that what you're saying? It's a combination of things. I think any writer is constantly on the lookout for a story. No matter what that person is writing, they're constantly on the lookout for a story. For me, it can be things I've seen in the news. It can be things that I've heard, that have happened to people I know. Or it can be just things I completely make up out of thin air. Usually it's some combination of those things. With The Forgotten Girl, I'm 44 years old, so I'm kind of at that age where there's enough time in the past that I can look back and say there are a lot of people in my life who I was really close to at one time, but I don't see them very much anymore, and I don't really know what they're up to anymore. So that impulse was in there. And also, I'd just been thinking for a long time, I just had this idea of a group of people who were really good friends in high school. What if something really unusual happened on their graduation night, and then they don't really talk about it, and they don't really revisit it for many, many years. And then now, in the present, they're having a reckoning with those events. So, just kind of these things that we sit around and think about,
Right. One thing that kept coming to my mind as I read the book, I kept thinking about the quote, "You can't go home again."
Right.
And, Hayden comes home. Jason, he's back at home after several years away from home. And I'm more like Colton. I'm the fat guy that never left. I'm still in my hometown, never had any inclination to leave.
Right.
I've read your biography. You've moved around a lot. Did you draw on any of your experiences about going back home when writing the character of Jason?
Yeah, absolutely. I grew up in Cincinnati, which is a big city, but if you know anything about Cincinnati, there's a clear demarcation between West Side and East Side in Cincinnati. And I grew up on the West Side, which is a part of town where people don't really leave. I mean, generations and generations of families have lived there. And if you want to leave, your parents I'm hoping my mother isn't watching this. Your parents can be pretty upset about that and say, you know, what's wrong? Why don't you want to stay? Why don't you want to stay near home? So I've always felt that pull between what people at home want me to do and expect me to do, which is be home and stay close to home, and I can understand that, versus what I feel like I need to do in life. And being a college professor, you really don't have a choice about where you end up. I mean, you apply for every job, and it's kind of like a lottery, and you just end up out there somewhere, which is why I've lived in North Carolina and now Kentucky. So absolutely, that's very much something that I've always thought about. And you know, I've moved away. I went back home for graduate school, so I kind of had that experience of what's it like to go back home when you're a little older and people have changed, or maybe people haven't changed. So yeah, I definitely drew on a lot of my own experience with that.
Good. And you know, Ednaville, the setting for the book, kind of a small town. How hard is it to construct a town in your head and put it on paper and make it come to life?
Well, Ednaville is a made-up town, and the towns in most of my books have been made-up towns. Mm-hmm. I set them in Ohio, but I don't want to be limited to a real place, because mainly I don't want people to read the book and say, oh, I've been to that town and there's no coffee shop on that corner, or the street doesn't go this way, it goes that way. So if I make up a town, I'm free to do whatever I want with it. And I make references to the rest of the state. So when I'm talking about Ohio, I'll say, oh, we went to Columbus, we went to Cincinnati, we watched a Reds game, whatever. But then I have the freedom to do that. And a lot of times, you know, I'll draw a little map of the downtown and say, you know, here's where I said the police station was, and here's where I said the library was, just so that I remember and I can kind of see the town. But usually I take some things from real towns, and then I just make the other stuff up to fit my purposes.
Pretty neat.
Yeah.
You got a new book coming out in July this year. I know this one's just fresh off the press, but can you go ahead and give us a kind of a sneak peek of what's titled? The title was Somebody I Used to Know?
Yes, Somebody I Used to Know will be out in July. They moved my release date up a little bit, so I had to work especially hard this last year to get it finished. But Somebody I Used to Know tells the story of a guy. At the very beginning of the book, he goes into the grocery store and he sees a young woman who's about 20 years old. This guy's about 40 years old. He goes into the grocery store and he sees this young woman who's about 20, and she looks identical to his college girlfriend who died 20 years earlier. So he thinks maybe they're related, and he goes up to talk to this girl and say, hey, are you related to the so-and-so family? And the girl freaks out and runs away. The next morning, someone knocks on his door. It's the police. The police show him a picture of the girl from the grocery store, and they tell him, this girl is dead, and she had your name and address in her pocket. What's going on, dude? And he's in a lot of trouble, and he has to try to figure out, is this girl really related to this woman who he thought had been dead for the last 20 years? And why was she showing up looking for him out of nowhere?
Wow. I hope you'll come back and talk about that one. It sounds great.
Absolutely.
For The Forgotten Girl is now out nationwide. I hope you'll pick up a copy of that. It's a great read, well worth your time and your money, or come by your library and check it out for free. If someone wants to learn more about David Bell, where can they go to find out some information about you and your books?
On my website, davidbellnovels.com. Has everything on there, events, how to buy the book, an excerpt from the book, reader's guides if you're in a book club. There's information on there if you're in a book club. And I'm also on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all those places. David Bell Novels is the handle, so they can find me on there.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming, Dr. Bell.
Thanks a lot.
We appreciate it. And I thank you for watching. I hope you will visit your public library and keep reading. Thank you.